The morning sun glistened over the manicured lawns of Windsor Castle, painting the ancient stone with a golden hue. Tourists murmured in excitement as they gathered at the castle gates, many angling their cameras toward the iconic royal guards who stood still as statues. It was April Fool's Day, a detail that barely registered with most people in this elegant, historic setting, but for Jamie Wilson, a young Australian with a wild streak and a phone full of viral video dreams, the date was everything. He had flown from Melbourne with little more than a backpack, his camera gear, and an idea he couldn't let go. His friends had begged him not to go through with it. They don't mess around. Jamie, one had said. Those guards are actual soldiers, not actors in costume. Jamie had waved them off with a grin. It's just a joke. I won't touch anyone, I won't break the rules, I'll just make people laugh. He believed in laughter the way some people believed in faith. It could break tension, connect strangers, and bridge divides. That was his mantra. And now, he stood just outside the railings at Windsor, his heart hammering but his smile wide, scanning for the perfect target. Corporal Barnes stood just inside the gates, tall and motionless in his red tunic and towering bearskin hat. His rifle rested against his shoulder, his face a picture of discipline and silence. Jamie had read about Barnes, online forums mentioned him often. He was known for being unflinching. Some said he hadn't blinked in 6 hours once. Jamie had chosen him precisely for that. He waited until the crowd thickened. A group of schoolchildren clutched maps and postcards. A couple whispered in French nearby. Jamie adjusted his hidden lapel mic, turned on his camera discreetly positioned in a tourist-looking backpack, and took a slow breath. Then, casually, as if he were just another tourist enjoying the day, he crossed toward the guard. "Day, mate," he said cheerfully, with his Australian drawl. No response, of course. Barnes stared ahead, his jaw set in invisible stone. "You all right in there? Must be hot with that hat, yeah." Still nothing. Jamie paced around him, not too close to violate the marked boundary, but enough to draw attention. "Blink twice if you're secretly watching Netflix on your phone." Some people in the crowd chuckled. A few began filming on their own phones, sensing something amusing was unfolding. Seriously though, Jamie continued, lifting a hand to shield his eyes from the sun, "I reckon you're like a vending machine. You put in some banter, and out comes, absolutely nothing." Barnes remained still. Not a flicker of reaction. The wind toyed gently with the edge of his coat, but he might as well have been made of granite. Undeterred, Jamie launched into exaggerated gestures. He mimed dramatic reactions. Pretended to be a mime trapped in an invisible box near the guard. At one point, he knelt down and proposed to the guard's boot. Laughter rippled through the tourists. One of the children asked their teacher, "Is this a show?" Jamie beamed inwardly. The energy was building. The videos were recording. The internet would love this, but even amid the humor, he was careful. He never stepped over the ceremonial line. He never touched the guard or blocked his path. He respected the boundary, at least physically. His next move was one he hadn't completely planned. It came in the moment, born of adrenaline and curiosity. He turned his back to Barnes, raised his phone in selfie mode, and began narrating, "Here we are at Windsor Castle. April Fool's Day. Me and my new best mate Barnesy here, he's a bit shy, but I reckon he'll warm up to me soon. Right, buddy?" Suddenly, a deep, steady voice cut the air, "Step away from the guard." Jamie froze. It wasn't Corporal Barnes. The voice had come from behind, an officer, crisp and composed, with a radio clip to his chest and a polite but firm gaze. Jamie stepped back immediately, hands raised in mock surrender. "No worries, sir. Just having a bit of fun. Harmless fun, you know." The officer didn't smile, but he also didn't escalate. Harmless becomes harmful if it disrupts the guard's duty. "We take this role seriously, even on April Fools. Of course, Jamie nodded, stepping back toward the crowd. Message received. The officer lingered a moment longer, then gave a subtle nod to the other tourists and returned to his station. Jamie took a moment to regroup. He hadn't been dragged away or fined. But something had shifted. The crowd murmured with less amusement now. A few phones lowered. A woman gave him a look of quiet disapproval. The joke had danced too close to the line. He backed away, settling on a nearby bench, watching the guard again. The crowd thinned and changed. Some people came and went. But Corporal Barnes remained rooted. Still. Stoic, Jamie replayed the footage on his phone. It was funny. It was clean. But as he watched himself circling the guard, as he heard his own voice tossing jokes at a man doing his duty, a subtle discomfort crept in. He looked around at the castle, at the history built into its walls, at the tourists respectfully photographing the guards. The architecture, the symbolism. He remembered his friend's words, "They're not actors." He realized he had captured a moment, but had he really earned it? Later that afternoon, he wandered through Windsor town, stopping at a local cafe. The barista, a cheerful man with a Windsor pin on his apron, struck up conversation. "You filming with the guard today?" The barista asked, spotting the camera gear. Jamie hesitated. "Yeah, something like that." "Well, as long as no one got shoved or shouted at. Those boys put up with a lot. Some of us round here reckon they deserve more credit." That stayed with Jamie. Back in his hotel, he uploaded the footage but didn't post it. Not yet. He trimmed it. Watched it again. Then, instead of titling it "Guard Gets Trolled," he called it, "The Man Who Would Not Blink." In his voiceover, he changed the tone. He kept the humor but added admiration. He talked about how discipline could be a kind of strength most people didn't understand. He added a clip of him stepping back after the officer's warning. And he ended the video with a still shot of Corporal Barnes. Unmoved, undisturbed. The video went viral, but not just for the laughs. People commented about the guard's composure, about the respect shown even amid jest. Veterans thanked him for not going too far. Teachers used the clip in lessons about self-control and tradition. A week later, Jamie got an email he didn't expect. It was from someone at the Ministry of Defense's Media Relations team. The message was brief: "Thank you for handling your April Fool's video with restraint and respect. We appreciate your creativity and your willingness to highlight the dignity of the role." Jamie leaned back in his chair, surprised and a little moved. He hadn't set out to make something meaningful. But maybe humor, when paired with humility, could create something more lasting than just a laugh. The next year, he returned to London, not with a prank in mind, but a small documentary project about ceremonial roles and the people behind the uniforms. He never expected it, but his playful stunt had led him somewhere unexpected. Back at Windsor, he spotted Corporal Barnes again, still standing tall, still silent, still watching the world go by. Jamie didn't wave or approach. He simply set up his tripod across the courtyard, hit record, and whispered, "Respect." Jamie, emboldened by the murmurs and laughter from the nearby tourists, leaned into the moment. His steps became larger, more theatrical, as he paraded a few feet in front of Corporal Barnes, hands flailing like a pantomime performer. With each exaggerated gesture, he pretended to be baffled by the guard's silence. "Is he a robot?" Jamie quipped aloud, turning to the crowd with wide eyes. "Seriously, blink twice if you're from the future." A few tourists chuckled. A couple snapped photos. One teen muttered, "That's actually kind of funny," while another looked less amused, folding his arms. Jamie didn't notice. He was too caught up in the energy of the moment. He mimicked the way the guard stood, mimed saluting with a goofy expression, even mock-posed like a Buckingham Palace doll. Rigid and upright, until he malfunctioned into a slow, dramatic fall sideways, catching himself before actually hitting the pavement. People laughed again, but not all. Still, Barnes didn't flinch. Jamie stepped back and mock whispered to the camera, "We are in the presence of a legend, folks." Not even a smirk. Nothing. It's like trying to prank a rock. He meant no harm. But what he didn't realize, at least not yet, was the weight of what that uniform represented. Barnes wasn't just a man in costume. He had served overseas. He had buried friends. He had stood guard not just over castles, but over fallen comrades. His silence wasn't indifference, it was honor, and now, in front of hundreds of strangers, a stranger with a camera was tossing jokes at him, unaware of what that stillness meant. From the edge of the crowd, an elderly man watched with a narrowed gaze. He wore a blazer with medals pinned neatly on his chest. His hands rested on a wooden cane, but his back was straight, and his eyes were sharp. Jamie continued, unaware, now narrating in the tone of a faux nature documentary. Here we observe the British Guard in his natural habitat, expertly ignoring the colorful Australian bird doing a mating dance nearby. That finally drew a snort from someone in the audience. But it also caused the elderly man to step forward slightly. He didn't interrupt, yet. He just watched. Finally, Jamie leaned close to the marked boundary and said, "Barnesy, mate, you and I, we're going viral." And then, something subtle happened. Barnes's jaw shifted, barely. His lips didn't move. His eyes didn't blink. But there was the faintest clench in his posture, as if he were grounding himself, resisting not laughter, not anger, but the quiet urge to remind this young man what he stood for. At that moment, Jamie's friend Callum, who had flown in the day before and stayed at the edge of the event, stepped closer and touched his arm. "Jamie," he said quietly, "I think that's enough." "What?" Jamie said, still grinning. Callum didn't answer. He just nodded his chin toward the old veteran, now approaching the line slowly, cane tapping softly on the stone. Jamie turned, and for the first time that day, his grin faltered. The man looked straight at him. "Young man," he said in a voice calm but commanding, "do you know what that uniform means?" Jamie straightened a little. "It's ceremonial, yeah. For tourists. A bit of British tradition." The veteran shook his head gently. "That's not a mannequin, son. That's a soldier. That's someone who's earned the right to stand there in silence. You're lucky he's more disciplined than most. I served. And I'll tell you something, discipline like that doesn't come from just standing still. It comes from standing through war." The crowd quieted. A few people lowered their phones. Even Jamie's camera, still recording, now felt heavy on his chest. The veteran tipped his head. "You've got spirit. But channel it into something worth watching." He turned and walked away. Jamie stood frozen for a moment. His cheeks burned, not with shame, exactly, but with the realization that he hadn't known the whole picture. He had come for laughter. But maybe he needed to leave with perspective. He slowly stepped back from the line. "Sorry, Barnesy," he said under his breath, and turned off the mic. The crowd dissolved. Some people stayed for the next changing of the guard. Others moved on. Jamie stood quietly for another 5 minutes, hands in his jacket, watching Corporal Barnes resume his stillness, a sentinel of a legacy older than anyone present. Later, when Jamie reviewed the footage in his hotel room, he saw the shift, where the laughter had started to dry. Where the old man had stepped in, where his own face had slowly changed. He didn't delete the video. But he changed the narrative. He turned the prank into a lesson. He posted the video with a new title, "Why the Guard Didn't React, and Why I'm Grateful He Didn't." The voiceover began not with jokes, but with honesty. "I came here thinking I was clever," Jamie said. "I thought I was poking fun at a character in a play. But I was looking at a soldier. And what I learned today is that real strength doesn't need to move to be felt." Despite the shift in atmosphere and the quiet intervention from the elderly veteran, Jamie, ever the showman, ever the believer in going just a bit further for the laugh, decided he wasn't done. He told himself it wasn't disrespect. He told himself that his tone was light, that he hadn't broken any rules. And besides, the video still felt incomplete. With his phone tucked into a gimbal and his mic reattached, Jamie returned to the castle gates a few hours later. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the stone walls, and the crowd had rotated, fresh tourists, new faces, and perhaps, he thought, another chance to make magic. Corporal Barnes was still on duty, or perhaps it was another soldier with an equally unreadable expression. Jamie couldn't tell. The uniform erased identity in the way only military precision could. But to Jamie, that uniform meant a chance for one more bit. He began subtly, pretending to film a documentary on the British Guard tradition. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to no one in particular, "today we uncover the secret training of the Queen's Guards. Rumor has it they are trained by monks, wizards, and possibly, Elon Musk." The crowd was slower to warm this time. A few laughs, a few confused glances. But Jamie pushed on. He pulled out a plastic toy microphone and began conducting mock interviews with the silent guard. "Mr. Barnes, do you consider your hat more of a fashion statement or a defense mechanism in winter warfare?" Silence. Jamie nodded solemnly. No comment. Truly the mark of a professional. A small boy giggled nearby, but his father pulled him away gently. A castle staff member, dressed in an official dark suit, appeared at the edge of the scene. His hands were behind his back, his posture diplomatic, but his eyes were firm. "Young man," he called out, "please keep a respectful distance. The guards are performing official duties." Jamie turned, offering his signature disarming grin. "Absolutely, sir. I'm just keeping it light. No harm done." The staff member didn't smile back. "This is a formal military post. Please treat it as such." Jamie nodded, but the moment the man stepped away, he launched into his next bit, a parody of the changing of the guard. With knees raised high and arms swinging stiffly, he began to march in a cartoonish loop on his side of the barrier. "Look at me, Mom. I'm ready for the Queen," he shouted, drawing a few amused gasps and a handful of camera phones. He kept one eye on Barnes, still, and another on his phone, making sure the shot was steady. "This is gold," he muttered to himself. "This is the one." But something was changing, not with the guard, but with the crowd. People were watching, yes, but not laughing. A middle-aged couple whispered disapprovingly. A teenager lowered his phone mid-record. Even the light in Jamie's own footage was beginning to shift, not the golden gleam of viral success, but the dull haze of overstaying your welcome, yet Jamie pressed on. He queued up a phone app that played the British national anthem and marched along to it in exaggerated rhythm, pretending to salute random tourists. He waved at pigeons like they were part of the royal family. He shouted at a passing bus, "They're letting me in. I passed the audition." A woman with a stroller rolled her eyes. A young man in a military academy hoodie looked away in awkward silence. The energy had shifted, and not in Jamie's favor. It was only when a second staff member arrived, this time with a walkie-talkie at his belt and a tone less cordial, that Jamie paused. "Sir," the man said calmly, "this is your final warning. Continued disruption will result in removal. Please step back and cease the performance." Jamie's instincts told him to make a joke, to defuse the tension with charm, but something in the staffer's eyes stopped him. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. Jamie lowered the mic. "Understood," he said softly. The man gave a small nod. "Thank you." Jamie stepped back. For real this time. Far enough that the guard was no longer the center of his lens. He found a bench away from the flow of tourists and sat down, letting the moment settle. His heart beat hard, not from nerves, but from something else. A realization, growing louder with each passing second. He had gone too far. what had started as light-hearted fun had evolved into something else. He'd ignored the warning signs, the shifting expressions, the subtle distance growing between himself and the crowd. He had mistaken tolerance for acceptance. And now, even he could feel it, this wasn't the kind of attention he wanted. Later that night, back in his hotel room, he watched the footage. The first few clips were funny. The early crowd had laughed. The guard had stood firm. It had all been harmless, or close to it, but the later clips, those told a different story. The laughs were hollow. His own voice began to sound forced. The camera, usually his best friend, now mirrored something uncomfortable, a young man trying too hard, missing the moment when the joke stopped being funny. He didn't upload that version. Instead, he sat with it. He remembered the veteran's words. He remembered the quiet pride in the staff members' voices, the stillness of the guard. And for the first time, he wondered not what would go viral, but what would endure, what message would outlast the clip. The next morning, he recorded a new monologue, facing the camera in a quiet park bench, Windsor Castle looming in the background. "Yesterday, I crossed a line," he said plainly. "Not legally. Not violently. But respectfully. I forgot that silence can speak louder than jokes. I forgot that some people stand still, not because they're lifeless, but because they've stood for something far greater than a laugh." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I went to film a prank. I left with a lesson." And this time, when he hit upload, it wasn't with the hope of going viral. It was with the hope that someone else, maybe another young kid with a camera and an idea, might understand what he hadn't. Before it was too late, Jamie had spent weeks preparing for what he privately called his main event. It wasn't something he planned to do first. No, that would be too much, too fast. It needed build-up. Tension. A string of harmless gags to soften the moment and earn just enough goodwill from the crowd. But after the fake interviews, the parody marching, and the tightening expressions from staff and onlookers, Jamie knew he was running out of time. This was it. Now or never. He reached into his backpack, retrieving what looked like a retro camera, a chunky, vintage-looking contraption with a faux leather grip and a retractable lens. But it wasn't a camera. Not really. It was a custom-made, high-pressure water gun, designed to spray a narrow stream with precision. It had taken him hours to build, just enough to make it look authentic, just enough to pass for an eccentric tourist's gadget. Jamie ran through the plan one more time in his mind. A quick line. A dramatic reveal. A burst of laughter. Then run before the silence turned to shouting. He approached the rail again. Corporal Barnes remained unmoved, as though the world had melted away and left only his duty behind. The sun was beginning to lower, casting a glow on his uniform, highlighting every button, every crease. The golden hour. Cinematic. Perfect. Jamie raised the fake camera, angled it toward Barnes's face, and shouted, "Say cheese." Then he pulled the trigger. A sharp stream of cold water fired directly into Corporal Barnes's face. The reaction was instant, but not the one Jamie expected. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Not laughter. Not cheering. Just one collective inhale, a sound sharp enough to split the air. Time slowed, water dripped from Barnes's chin. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed, not in rage, but in something worse, quiet violation. The stoicism remained, but there was an unmistakable shift, like a crack beneath the surface of granite. Invisible until you stepped too hard, Jamie froze. For the first time in his life, the camera in his hand felt heavy. The prank, so carefully planned, so brilliantly crafted in theory, now lay like broken glass at his feet. A small child clutched his mother's coat. A man in military uniform from the crowd stepped forward instinctively before restraining himself. The staff, no longer calm, moved fast. 2 security officers crossed the courtyard with brisk, purposeful strides. Corporal Barnes didn't flinch. He didn't shout. He didn't wipe the water from his face. He simply stood, drenched, and continued to do his duty. That was what broke Jamie, not anger. Not punishment. But the fact that even now, humiliated, disrespected, this man remained still. Because that's what he had sworn to do. The officers reached Jamie in seconds, dropped the object. One said, "Jamie did, no resistance," he said quietly. I'm done." They escorted him away, not roughly, but firmly. The crowd parted like water around a rock. Some people recorded it. Others shook their heads. A few turned away altogether, unwilling to watch the aftermath of a joke gone too far. Back at the security office, they asked questions. Jamie answered honestly. He explained the intent, the design of the device, his lack of malicious motive. The officers weren't unkind, but they were clear. The prank had crossed a line, not just of protocol, but of dignity. "You didn't break a law," one said finally, "but you broke something else. Something we take seriously." Jamie was released, but not without a formal warning and a note that further action could be taken if the footage was misused. He returned to his hotel in silence. The streets of Windsor no longer looked quaint, they felt cold. Foreign. Heavy with eyes, in his room, he stared at the footage. The main event sat at the end of his memory card. Waiting. The freeze frame of water arcing midair. The moment Barnes blinked, not from fear, but because a boundary had been violated, Jamie couldn't watch it again. He deleted it. No edits. No narration. No chance to spin the story into comedy. It wasn't funny. It never had been. It was arrogance wrapped in charm, ignorance camouflaged as playfulness. He had mistaken a sacred post for a stage, and now, the applause had been replaced by silence. He turned off the lights and sat in the dark, a single question echoing through his chest: what had he really been trying to prove? Before the officers even arrived, something unexpected happened. Corporal Barnes moved, not with fury. Not with speed. But with deliberate, practiced precision. He stepped forward, not lunged, but advanced, closing the gap between him and Jamie in 2 strong strides. His arm came out, firm but controlled, and with a smooth twist of the wrist, he gripped the camera-turned water gun from Jamie's hand and lowered it to his side. No aggression. Just absolute command. Jamie staggered back, stunned. The world seemed to go silent. Barnes finally spoke. "This is not a joke," he said, his voice deep and level, steady enough to cut through the tension without ever rising in pitch. "You've crossed a line." Jamie opened his mouth, then closed it again. He'd spent years using words to control situations. To charm, to narrate, to spin. But now, he was wordless. Barnes held the dripping device between them. "This," he said, "is assault. Not performance. And I don't care how many followers you have or what you plan to call your video, this stops now." The crowd was frozen. A hush hung in the air. Even the guard stationed nearby had subtly turned their attention to the unfolding moment. Barnes continued, voice unwavering. "You think I'm an actor in a costume. You think this post is about tradition and display. But let me explain something, since you've made a show of ignoring the warnings." He stepped back and stood tall once more, the water glistening on his uniform under the fading sun. "I'm not here for your amusement. I'm here because I've earned the right to be. I've served. I've seen combat. I've stood over flag-draped coffins of men who wore the same uniform as I do now." His words weren't loud, but each one landed with the weight of truth. "I don't speak during duty not because I can't, but because I choose to honor what this post stands for. I stay silent so tourists can take their photos and see a living symbol of commitment and composure. Not so a stranger can treat me like a carnival prop." Jamie's mouth went dry. He'd come with jokes and clever edits in mind. Now, he felt the raw, unmistakable sting of reality, the kind that no punchline could cover. Barnes glanced around, addressing not just Jamie now, but the gathering of people who'd witnessed everything. Royal Guards are not decorations, he said. We are soldiers. Many of us have served abroad, faced things you'll never see through a camera lens. And when we stand here, motionless, it's not for show. It's for remembrance. For duty. For those who can't stand anymore. He handed the confiscated water gun to one of the arriving officers, who stepped forward wordlessly to receive it. I'm not angry, Barnes said to Jamie, quietly now. I'm disappointed. Because I think you could have used your talent for something greater than this. Jamie's throat tightened. He wanted to apologize, but the words, too late and too shallow, wouldn't come. Barnes returned to his position. His hands returned to their place on his rifle. His face hardened once more into disciplined stillness. And just like that, the moment was over. The officers, unsure whether further action was necessary, asked Jamie to leave the premises. Not as a criminal, but as someone who had, without doubt, overstayed his welcome. Jamie obeyed, as he walked away, back through the wrought iron gates. Down the castle's cobbled path, through the murmuring crowd, he carried no footage, no punchline, no victory. Only the weight of his own misjudgment and the voice of a soldier who had stood still until the moment demanded he speak. Back in his hotel room, the silence rang louder than it ever had in his videos. That night, Jamie uploaded no content. He stared at a blank title bar for hours. Then, finally, he wrote only one sentence in his private video journal, the file never to be made public. A joke at the expense of service is not a joke, it's ignorance, filmed. He closed the laptop. For the first time, he didn't care if anything he filmed ever went viral again, he just wanted to be better. Security didn't manhandle him. They didn't throw him to the ground or speak to him with rage. That, in many ways, made it harder. The two guards who walked on either side of him were calm, quietly professional, almost solemn, as if even they knew that what had happened wasn't about mischief anymore. It was about something deeper. Something sacred that had been breached. Jamie didn't resist. He didn't crack a joke. He didn't smile for the bystanders' phones. He walked with his hands at his sides. Head low, eyes fixed on the stone path beneath his feet. The laughter that had echoed around him only minutes ago was now gone. In its place, the weight of realization settled into his chest like lead. One of the guards spoke softly as they neared the main gate. You're lucky it was Barnes. Anyone else might have reacted differently. Jamie nodded, the words catching in his throat. I know, he whispered. I'm sorry. He meant it. Not just in the surface-level way people often said it after crossing a line, but in a bone-deep, genuine way that only comes after seeing the human cost of your own ignorance. At the outer edge of the courtyard, they stopped. One of the officers handed him a formal citation notice, a written warning. Not a criminal charge. It would stay in the records. It could have been worse. Much worse. But the paper wasn't what haunted Jamie, it was the image burned in his mind. Barnes, soaked but unshaken, speaking truth not with outrage but with calm, collected dignity. And the faces in the crowd, disappointed, silent, perhaps even betrayed by someone they'd expected to entertain them. As he crossed the bridge away from Windsor Castle, Jamie turned once more and looked back. The crowd had moved on. New tourists stood where he had stood. Phones out. Smiles bright. But Corporal Barnes stood exactly as before, still, solemn, unwavering, and Jamie understood, that was the point. Back in his hotel room that night, he sat in silence for hours. He didn't even unpack his gear. The file from the day's filming remained untouched. There would be no editing tonight. No narration. No cheeky title cards. The footage wasn't his story to tell anymore. Eventually, he opened his laptop, not to upload, but to reflect. He recorded a quiet video. No background music. No fast cuts. Just him, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking into the lens, not for views, but for honesty. I came here thinking I could be clever, he began. That I could push boundaries for a laugh. That as long as no one got hurt, it was just fun. But what I did today wasn't harmless. He paused. I sprayed water into the face of a soldier who stood without reaction, not because he's a statue, but because he's stronger than I'll ever be. I mocked a tradition that I didn't understand. I thought I was the smart one. Turns out, I was the fool. He looked down for a moment, his voice catching. You see, there's a difference between humor and harm. A difference between challenging the world and just disrespecting it. And today, I learned that difference the hard way. He let the silence settle. Then looked back up. If you're a creator, if you have a camera, a platform, a voice, use it for something that lifts people. That teaches. That listens. Because some things are not ours to mock. They're built from sacrifice. From discipline. From blood. The screen faded to black, and the final frame read, "Respect is not earned by going viral. It's earned by knowing when to put the camera down." In the weeks that followed, Jamie Wilson didn't post any pranks. Instead, he traveled quietly through Europe, filming stories of people who served in quiet roles, doormen, nurses, veterans, janitors in museums. He asked questions instead of delivering punchlines. He listened more than he spoke. The video from Windsor Castle remained on his hard drive. He never uploaded it. Not because he was ashamed to be seen, but because he knew that moment belonged to someone else now, and he had no right to steal it. But the lesson, it stayed with him forever, and for the first time, the man who had built a career on laughter finally understood the power of silence. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit like and share it. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring videos. Thanks again and see you in the next one.